Began my professional career here in 1962 when I went to work for DeKalb County. Spent about 2.5 years there doing things that nobody else wanted to do, basically as an administrative assistant to whomever needed something done. Worked in personnel and public information and planning and a little bit of everything. I left there in the fall of '64 and went to work for Fulton County as assistant to the county manager. Stayed in Fulton County for a little over 7 years, almost 7.5 years. So I was in local government in the two counties for about 10 years before coming to the Atlanta Regional Commission in 1972. I spent a year here at ARC as the Director of Governmental Services, working to basically to sit down with county commissioners, mayors, and city council folks, and explain to them what this new organization called ARC was all about. Hopefully that they had nothing to fear, and more importantly, what they could gain by supporting and working with the organization. After a year of that, Dan Sweat, who had been the first director of ARC, moved on, and I was elected to be the executive director. 27 years later, I retired, at least from public service. After 38 years in the public sector, I decided I wanted to see if it really was true that public officials couldn't cut it in the private sector. So I joined Parsons Corporation and was there for 7 years, and found it not to be nearly as challenging as public work. After that, I did something I'd never done before in my life. I took 2 months off and didn't do anything but think. And then in the fall of 2007, went to work at the Center for Quality Growth and Regional Development at Georgia Tech, where I'm having a good time with colleagues there, and it's a different sort of life. So it's really, I guess, my fourth career. First in local government, then in regional planning, in private business, and now in academia. So you can do things differently if you want to. So that, in a nutshell, that's what I've been doing for the last 6 years, and still feel like I've got a few more years left in me.
Well, as the director of ARC, you witnessed the construction of many pieces of key infrastructure in this region, from probably the connector to, I don't know if you were around when the connector, but the 285, Georgia 400, MARTA. You've been around through lots of the expansion of our infrastructure and the resulting development that's occurred. We'd love to, just hear your thoughts about what were the most important events or activities that occurred during your tenure.
Well, I think, Dan, that it certainly started before my tenure. I like to think of Atlanta as its modern history as beginning sometime in the middle of World War II. If you look at what's been planned, what's been implemented, how we've developed, much of it has its roots back to that time. I think it's really amazing to see how forward-thinking the leadership of this area was at that point in time. The war itself changed the way people think of or thought of Atlanta. Instead of just another sleepy southern town like Birmingham or Chattanooga or Nashville at the time, people began to see that there was some real possibilities here. I think some of it started with Mr. Woodruff saying that every soldier ought to have, regardless of where they were in the world, have access to a daily Coca-Cola. And that carried Atlanta's name around the world. Soldiers came here, recruits from all over the United States or around to the South to be trained. Much of the debarkation of materials went out of Atlanta, and then I think the real coup was when the Bell Aircraft Corporation decided to build what we now know as Lockheed, and the city of Atlanta had to run a water line from downtown up to Smyrna, Marietta, so they could have water to build the plant. The intergovernmental cooperation, the feeling that we're all in this together, I think was established with that war mentality. And they began to see that in order to maintain this and make it something that could continue, we had to plan for that future. And that's when modern planning in Atlanta really started. In 1946, the first transportation plan, first regional transportation plan for this area was produced. And it basically laid out the basis of the freeway system as we know it today, the downtown connector, 75, 85, and it talked about a future road to Augusta. They didn't talk about going to Birmingham, so I don't know what the problem was there, but 75, 85 was pretty much laid out in that original plan, both the north and southern legs of it. And it also talked about transit. It talked about the need for east-west cross-regional bus lines and connectors to match up with the north-south service. It talked about making sure that we protected the area beneath Peachtree Street for the possibility of a tunnel that the buses could operate in, and then in the long-range future, trains could operate in that tunnel. So it was a real breakthrough for that plan to be put in place, and the city of Atlanta and Fulton County actually passed bond issues, general obligation bond issues, that same year to begin the construction. And the downtown connector was actually under construction by the end of 1946. So things moved rather quickly from plan to financing to construction to get things moving. At the same time, Mayor Hartsfield was lobbying Congress like crazy to authorize the construction of Beaufort Dam, because he had seen the need with running the water line up to serve Bell aircraft, that the Chattahoochee River by itself wasn't going to be able to handle things. So he was lobbying Congress in the late 40s for authorization of Beaufort Dam and construction, and ultimately Lake Lanier for our water supply. A lot of those kinds of things were going on. They also thought maybe it would be a good time to see about the feasibility of consolidation of Atlanta and Fulton County. And they hired the National Municipal League, that later became the National Civic League, to come in and do a study of the two governments. And that study became known as the Plan of Improvement, or the study itself was called the Reed Report, for the fellow who wrote it, Dr. Thomas Reed. But the Plan of Improvement that came out of that was basically the recommendations that Dr. Reed came up with. He concluded that it probably wasn't feasible for the governmental consolidation, but he did recommend functional consolidation. So that was one of the primary recommendations. Another was that since they couldn't consolidate the governments, they needed a multi-jurisdictional planning agency, and he recommended the creation of the Metropolitan Planning Commission. A lot of other recommendations and things that have been implemented in the region can tie back directly to that study. But in 1947, the Georgia General Assembly created the Metropolitan Planning Commission, and it operated until 1960 as a two-county, Fulton and DeKalb, and the cities in those two counties, including Atlanta, of course, as the regional planning agency. Produced two regional plans during that period of time. The first plan in 1952 recommended growth be concentrated in the city of Atlanta and in existing nodes that are already in place, like Decatur and Roswell and East Point, and that we should connect all of those nodes with adequate modern transportation. And no one liked it. The plan was just not acceptable to the community. And MPC was told to go back and try again. So 2 years later, they produced the second regional plan that basically said concentrate growth in the city of Atlanta and in concentric circles therefrom. So we began in 1954 planning the sprawl that we have today. So when people say, "Oh, the sprawl wasn't planned," I say wrong. Go back and look at the '54 plan. But we still could have made changes along, and we tried to do better planning. Produced plans in the '60s that laid out the MARTA system, the referendum MARTA system that we know today. And in 1965, the Georgia General Assembly created MARTA. Composed it of 5 counties, the same 5 counties that were in ARMPC, which Atlanta Region Metropolitan Planning Commission, that succeeded MPC in 1960. In addition to Fulton and DeKalb, of course, were Cobb, Gwinnett, and Clayton. And those were the original members of MARTA, as created by the General Assembly. I tried a couple of times to pass referendum to implement it, but it didn't actually happen until 71, or was it 71 or 72? 71, I think. It's getting a little fuzzy as I get older. But the 60s were an interesting time for Atlanta. There was a lot of domestic legislation being passed by Congress that required area-wide planning, starting with the 62 Federal Highway Act that required region-wide transportation planning. And there were the amendments to the Social Security Act in 65 that required comprehensive health planning. In 68, there was the Law Enforcement Assistance Administration created by the Crime and Safe Streets Act that required law enforcement planning. For some reason, and it's still an enigma to me, the powers that be at that time did not just automatically say, okay, we've got ARMPC, let them do this additional planning. Instead, we created new agencies to do the planning. For transportation, we had the Atlanta Area Transportation Study. For health planning, we had the Metropolitan Atlanta Council for Health. For the law enforcement planning, we had the Metropolitan Atlanta Council of Local Governments. So there was a lot of creation, and in addition to that, we had the Community Action Agency created. So by the end of the 60s, we had a bunch of different regional planning agencies covering the same geographical area for different purposes, but vying for the same local leadership and support and resources. And finally, somebody said, this doesn't make a lot of sense. Why don't we consolidate these organizations? And so groups started taking a look at it. They were going in different directions, different groups. Finally, they consolidated their efforts, and in 1970 recommended legislation that would have created a new regional agency and abolished all the others. It had one pretty glaring flaw, as it turned out, in that proposed legislation. It would have allowed the new regional agencies to have taxing power, and that didn't go over too well with the members of the General Assembly in 1970. So they went back and took another look at it, came up with a new financing mechanism, and in 1971 the law that created what became known as ARC was passed. It was really groundbreaking organizational theory at the time. When it was approved, there wasn't another one like it anywhere in the United States, and I'm not sure there is today that has its local support guaranteed in law, a specific formula for doing that, has its board determined by the law that the primary local elected officials, like the mayor of Atlanta and the county commission chairman, have to be on the board. They can't send a substitute. So it was a new way of looking at regional issues, and I think over the years has proven to be a model that has really worked here and worked well. Those first few years were an exciting time to be involved. Shortly after the board was fully created and the staff was in place, a retreat was held for the board to decide priorities. And interestingly, the first actions of the new ARC board was to say that long-range water supply was the -- issue facing the region. Unfortunately, it still is. Not to take anything away from the people who have worked long and hard and produced plans that would have solved that problem. Unfortunately, none of those plans have been implemented, and so we still today have the same problem. Running a close second to long-range water supply was transportation, and there was a real collegial effort of the local elected officials to do something and to get it done differently than had been in the past. MARTA was under construction in some selected places, and there was a real fervor of, we can really do this. And ARC produced a plan in 1975, a regional transportation plan for the year 2000. In 1975, it projected 3 million people would be in the region in the year 2000. You have to remember there was just a little over 1 million at the time, and people kind of guffawed that we would be projecting 3 million people by the year 2000. But nonetheless, we stuck by our guns and produced a plan to serve 3 million people. It was really a different way of thinking because it eliminated a lot of freeways that had been on the books for some time. A second perimeter highway that went all the way around the region was taken out of the plan. Something called the West Side Connector that would have extended 85 southbound from Brookwood Station across the west side and tied back in somewhere down below the airport. I-485 that was and the Stone Mountain Freeway, the interchange of those two being where the Carter Library sits today, were both taken out of the plan. In its place, you say, well, you took out all these freeways. Wasn't that kind of dumb? Well, it depends on one's point of view, because to replace them, the plan called for construction of rail transit, extension of MARTA in all 5 core counties, running rails into Gwinnett, Cobb, Clayton, and to serve the others with rapid buses that would connect into those rail lines. Well, 2000 came. We had 3 million people. We didn't have the freeways that had been eliminated, but neither did we have the transit. It just didn't happen. So those 1.5 to 2 million newcomers that came in distributed themselves across the region in a way completely differently than they would have had those rail lines been in place. So we exacerbated the sprawl by not building the transit lines that were called for. If you fast forward to 2000, we had been in a situation where we didn't meet our goals for air quality, non-attainment, and to meet the air quality goals, we had to produce a new transportation plan that would meet those air quality standards. Well, that 2000 plan again had rail in it all over the place, commuter rail from downtown to in almost every direction was called for in that 2000 plan. Well, we haven't done that either. You still can't ride a train on any of the commuter lines. So we've had great planning, but our scorecard on implementation hadn't done too well.
You touch on a lot of things that I think we could talk more about. Let's just first, why have we not done better with transit implementation? Is it just money? Is it not having the right tools in place? Maybe like the bill that we tried to get through the legislature this year. I mean, because we've had a lot of federal dollars in the past, and was there not, or was it priorities? They're all.
Yeah, it's a tough one, and I often wonder if we had the same kind of people continuously that were doing those things back in 1945 and 46, would it have made a difference? Does it all come down to leadership? Can you make things happen if the right people are pushing and making, agitating for it to occur? I think about more, I guess, sometimes the analogy of water supply as opposed to transportation. That every time we have a drought, people get concerned. And so a plan gets produced, and then it starts raining again, and people forget about it. It doesn't work that way with transportation. Starting to rain again just makes the traffic worse. So the congestion doesn't go away. So why don't we do something about it? And I wonder if it isn't just the leadership is not on the same page.
Well, you are known sort of for promoting regional planning, consensus building, and you mentioned the gain from that, and I think that's it's a little bit underappreciated sometimes, that local governments or leaders sort of think parochially and don't appreciate some of the benefits of regional coordination, regional infrastructure. Can you expand on that a little bit more? ARC's been a leader. Do you feel like that's being more recognized now?
Oh, I do. I do. I think ARC has a wonderful track record of getting local leaders to work together and come up with the right kinds of decisions. It may be a good thing that ARC hasn't been given full implementation powers. That might be too much to ask for. But sometimes I think that if that same attitude of working together to solve problems and produce plans could be carried that one next step to making sure it happens, we might all be better off as a result of it. But we spend all of this time getting all of these top-notch leaders to work together to produce a plan, and then we hand it off, and where's the leadership? It just, maybe it's mechanisms, maybe the right structure just hasn't been in place. Maybe ARC hasn't had enough authority. You know, when you get beyond ARC in a metropolitan area as large as this one is, there isn't anything bigger than that other than the state. We've not been fortunate to have all of the state leadership understand just how important this goose that lays the golden egg is. Fortunately, to this point, they haven't screwed it up, but you wonder how much longer that can last.
Well, and it doesn't appear that the model is still there yet. I mean, we hand off plans for either local government to implement, Georgia DOT maybe. GRTA was a response to this, but obviously I think you and I would state that we don't think that filled the role. So we're still left without.
Yeah, you know, when you think about it, ARC has produced excellent plans. Many of them have not been implemented. And yet when a problem comes up, the first thing you hear somebody say is, somebody should have planned for this. There should have been better planning. Why didn't we plan to make sure this didn't happen? Well, it's not the lack of plans, it's the lack of doing. But every time you hear one of these criticisms of, well, we didn't have the right kind of planning, our knee-jerk reaction is to create another agency. And you know, we've created GRETA, and we've created the Transit Planning Board, and we've created the Water Planning District. So we've got 3 new public agencies that I guess planning. We still don't have anything implemented, and it. You know, history has a way sometimes of repeating itself. Are we back to the 60s where we're going to create all these additional agencies, and then, you know, some few years from now somebody's going to say, well, this doesn't make any sense. Why don't we consolidate those? Well, we did that once before, you know.
It does seem interesting that a lot of folks outside of government, or maybe it's not just outside, but kind of don't look at the established planning process that was in place since the 40s, local governments, ARC, and try to figure out how to work within that and empower that versus starting anew. Starting anew is a sexy thing to do.
Yeah, it's well, you know, sometimes people feel compelled to do something. You know, even sometimes when they know it's wrong, they need to do something to show that they're moving ahead. And it's you know, it's a lot easier to create a planning agency or say we're going to do a plan than it is to say we're going to do something. They tend to get more opposition or more concern. People aren't afraid of another planning agency. They're sometimes afraid of things that can do stuff.
Well, and it is more difficult to work with 10 counties and a lot of local governments and the established processes. It takes longer.
Yeah.
What other sort of You mentioned ARC's plans. Obviously, you were very involved in the Metropolitan River Protection Act, the environmental planning aspects of ARC. Can you talk a little bit more about those?
Yeah, I first got involved with the river when I was still at Fulton County as the county manager. There was a growing group of concerned citizens that didn't feel like the river had adequate protection, that we weren't looking at it for its real value to the region, its importance to the region. The group was called Friends of the River, and I think it probably started at a bridge club or something, but it grew, and Friends of the River came to the county. Obviously, the county was very much Fulton County, very much a part of the river, and we started working with that group. And the first public parkland on the river was a direct result of our getting involved and looking at what's now called I guess it's called the Roswell area or whatever. It's on the river there on get the name of the street, but it was owned by Georgia Power Company as floodplain for the Morgan Falls Dam, and so we went to the power company and started talking to them about donating that excess land that they had there between the river and the road as for a park. And after a while, they agreed to do that, but ran into some problems where they couldn't, for some reason, some federal regulation, they couldn't do it. And so we all took off to Washington and went to this regulatory agency. I think it was called FERC or something like that, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission or something. And sat down and convinced them that it was okay for Georgia Power to give away this property. So they deeded it to Fulton County, that part that's in Fulton County, and Cobb County got part of it as well. And so that was the first real involvement I had in trying to get things happening on the river. But after I came to ARC with the Commission's number one priority being long-range water supply, we realized quickly that we needed to protect the river, and we got a group together to do what became the Chattahoochee Corridor Study. We got some cooperation out of an authority that was up in the Georgia mountains around Helen. They had some money, and we put some of it together. And Randy Rourke, who was involved in that, Dean Allen, who's the interim dean of the College of Architecture, Georgia Tech, was a part of that study. And I was kind of the liaison lead for ARC, and we put that study together. And it's interesting because ARC is still using the basic analysis out of that 1972-73 study for its measurement of activity in the Chattahoochee Corridor. The land development categories of A through F, and the sensitivity because of slope and drainage and flora and all of the other aspects that were put together to come up with the categories and the mapping of that entire 46-mile stretch, still being used today. So that study led to the passage of the Metropolitan River Protection Act, which in effect took the study and put it into law, that this is the way we would deal with that. And that then led to, well, after Mr. Carter got to Washington, led to the passage of the legislation that created the Chattahoochee River National Recreation Area, and provided funds to begin implementing the acquisition of land along the river for parks and open space that had been advocated in the plan itself. So all of those things kind of fit together, and all started with a group of folks saying, we got to do something.
Well, it's interesting that the Metropolitan River Protection and the study, you're right, is probably one of the best examples of now what we call GIS. Before GIS was even invented, overlaying different characteristics and
right.
ultimately implementing.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really interesting early use. You mentioned the involvement of partners all the way up to Chattahoochee. I think it's sort of interesting that we don't focus much above Lake Lanier, the headwaters of our water source. Any thoughts on that? Should we be thinking more about?
Originally, those folks were very much involved in the study. I mean, that's where Randy Rourke and those folks came from. Somehow, the protection of that upstream from the lake parts of the river never materialized. The funding, the authority that was there somehow went away. And Randy and Dean Allen became college professors, and it never happened. I don't know why.
Well, it might interest you, Lance. Sorry to, but right now we're working with the Trust for Public Land to map a lot of the areas that TPL has acquired, and they don't actually have mapped.
Oh.
They have parcels of land they don't even know where they are specifically on the river. So we're helping them do that with an intern.
Great.
I just wanted to, since you were involved in Fulton County during the '60s, I thought it might be interesting to hear your thoughts about just the whole recent changes with creating cities of Milton, city of Sandy Springs, city of Johns Creek, city of Chattahoochee Hill, and now we're going to have the city of Dunwoody in DeKalb. What do you think are the causes of that?
Well, if you go back to the plan of improvement, the functional consolidation that occurred between Atlanta and Fulton County, all municipal services were given to the city, and all state-type services were given to the county. And all the county police department, the county fire department, the county parks and recreation department, all of those things were given to the city. The responsibility for public health, welfare, and hospitals and things like that were given to the county. The idea being that with the functional consolidation, there wouldn't be any overlap of services, and as areas contingent to the city developed, there was an automatic annexation provision in the law, so that the theory was that as the need for municipal services developed, that area would automatically come into the city, and the city would continue to provide the services. Well, it was a great idea. It just didn't work. The annexation piece, the automatic annexation piece, didn't occur, and so you had places like Sandy Springs that developed, and you're sitting there with relatively expensive homes and upscale neighborhoods, and they're served with a volunteer fire department. And they said, wait a minute, this doesn't work. We want services. And so there was some accommodation to that, where the county contracted with the city of Atlanta to provide police services and fire protection and that sort of thing in a defined service area in Sandy Springs. And that worked for a while, but it had its problems, and the city then decided that they would test the automatic annexation provisions, and this was like many years after the legislation was passed, and many years after the development had occurred. And so when they tried to test the annexation, there was obvious opposition to it, and the opposition took the city to court and won. So the automatic annexation provision of the plan of improvement was declared unconstitutional, so it didn't work. And after I left the county, some years after I left the county, they just decided that it didn't make a lot of sense to continue contracting with the city to provide that service. And in the meantime, the state constitution had been rewritten and basically gave counties in the state the same authority to provide services that cities have. So the county just got back into the municipal service provision again. Now, why did they go from that to cities? I think it was more a question of land use than anything else. If the people in Sandy Springs had been able to control zoning, they probably would have gone a long time before actually having gone the full way of creating a city. But since that wasn't possible under the circumstances, they finally were able to get a whole city. And from all I can tell, it's working very well.
Director here at ARC during some interesting political struggles. One that comes to mind is a presidential parkway. Maybe even, I can't recall when the Lindbergh-MARTA station issue was going on. Some of those, I guess, were good learning experiences for planners. Any thoughts about any of those ones, those events of the struggles of building infrastructure and communities' resentment and?
Well, I think we learned a lot about community involvement and individual participation in the process. I guess I had the benefit of the School of Hard Knocks because I came into public service before there was ever any thought of public involvement. I mean, we used to beg when I was at Fulton County we'd have a public hearing on the budget, and the representative of the League of Women Voters would come and say something, and that was about it. But then the whole issue of participation, I think, was brought to the fore with the passage of the legislation that created community action agencies. The whole concept of community action agencies was to involve the people in the planning to help improve their own way in the world. And that began, in my opinion, what we now know as public involvement. So I had the benefit of seeing it from the beginning as that legislation passed in '64, and we began to see the benefits. Didn't know a lot about how to do it, but we began to see the benefits of involving people who were going to be impacted by public decisions in the process.
And that required public involvement for federally funded?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So when ARC was created, the first thing we did was create a citizens advisory committee for every one of our major departments. So we had more citizens all over the place than you knew what to do with, but we didn't really know how to use them or use their input or to keep them interested, to make sure that there was something there for them. And so it's been a slow learning process. But, it's 64. We're talking 40 plus years now of slowly learning more day by day of how to involve people in the process of government, and I think where we are is a long way from where we've come, but probably still a lot more to be learned.
Well, we still have the presence of in Metro Atlanta and across the country of NIMBYs, right?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts about housing issues? Sort of some of how local governments have used zoning to sort of create enclaves. I mean, any thoughts on where we've been and where we might be, how we might improve on that?
I studied the Montgomery County, Maryland approach many years ago, and I still think it's a model. It's worked very well. And it's the kind of thing that the Atlanta Housing Authority has been doing with its redevelopment of integrating economic strata into developments, and it just makes a lot of sense. When you dump a bunch of kids into a ghetto, that's all they're going to learn. But if you mix them with other kinds of opportunities, they're going to know more about what's happening and strive to do better. And so it just makes a lot of sense for economic integration to be a requirement of residential development. I mean, we're seeing the benefits of integration of uses. I mean, when I was coming along, we were taught, you put the houses over here and the industry over there and the retail over here and the church back there, and never mix them together. But now we see that isn't the best way to go. So we're integrating uses. We need to integrate the economic levels as well. I mean, it's a small town that so many people grew up with that we all got away from.
Right. And these are just some of my personal thoughts that I'm interested to hear your thoughts on. City of Atlanta, during a lot of your tenure in the 60s and the 70s, was declined all the way up, I guess, until even the mid-80s. And now is resurging, maybe a little bit overbuilt right now in condos, but what do you, do you think this is just a natural phenomena of life cycle of real estate, or is there some reason that finally it took hold? I often wonder, is it sort of Atlanta just sort of the national economy is driving some of this and we've benefited? I don't know.
It probably all of the above. The real exodus from the city started in the late 70s, early 80s. And we began to see it with development around the perimeter on the north side. We did get a shove, maybe, in that direction by developers coming in from outside. I remember sitting in my office one day with Frank Carter, and he was lamenting the fact that he had property on 285 in the Sandy Springs, Dunwoody area that was zoned for X number of square feet per acre, and the developers from Texas had come in and gotten their zoning for 10 times that much, and that they were going to ruin the entire market for all of this density that they were bringing in. So there was a push, I think, from the outside in some ways that led to a lot of what we see in the perimeter center area today. Rebounding into the city, I think a lot of it has to do with congestion and a more cosmopolitan citizen. We're growing. People are coming here from all over the world. They want a different kind of lifestyle. A cottage with a picket fence is not in the countryside is not necessarily their idea of utopia. And so what we've said, I think, all along, Dan, is that we need choices. We need to be able to give people choices in terms of their lifestyle, of their transportation mode, of where they live, of how they relate. And if we provide choices, then we're going to be okay. Not everybody wants to live downtown in a high-rise condo, and not everybody wants to live in the suburbs on a quarter-acre lot. But a lot of people want both, or either or. Not everybody wants to ride the train. But we got to give them those choices. If we don't, we're going to be missing the boat.
You mentioned, this morning, Paul Kelman talked a lot about the City of Atlanta, about the success of public-private partnerships, the leadership of the City of Atlanta. And it really makes me think, both I'd like to hear what you have to say about public-private partnerships, and that is a tool, but also your thoughts about, in terms of pushing transit or pushing more inclusive housing. I really am a strong believer that the public sector has to step up. The private sector can do some things, but the private sector will do the most if the public sector is already out there leading. Your thoughts on sort of the role of the public sector and the whole idea of public versus private partnerships or public versus private roles?
I think what the Atlanta Housing Authority has done is just one tremendous boon to the city. If we had that kind of development all over the region, I think we would all be better off as a result. I think what Renee has done is just outstanding. The Atlanta Neighborhood Development Partnership is pushing in that direction. But again, they're more private than public, and we really need the kinds of leadership that the Atlanta Housing Authority has shown in order to make that kind of development happen. Fortunately, for the city, the Housing Authority owns a lot of land, and as they're making these conversions, they're building some beautiful residential areas, and I think that is a model for what could be done by other local governments.
So you see other local governments, particularly some that are just on the suburban fringe, like a Gwinnett that now has gone through a first life cycle of development, needs some redevelopment. I guess Gwinnett, Cobb, all of them are looking at some of these redevelopment tools. They have TADs. You think?
Well, I mean, obviously the city of Smyrna has done a tremendous job in reconstituting a whole city. Mayor Bacon is. I remember going out there and visiting with him and having him drive me around the old streets and saying, "Now we're going to tear this out and throw this through and do this." And he had a vision, and he's been able to stay in office and make it happen. That's not always possible, but I think Decatur is a good example of, even though they've had changes in leadership over the years, they had a plan, and they've stuck by their plan, and it's worked. So I think you can go, it can happen either way. You can have a leader who stays in office and sees his vision implemented, or you can have a vision that the community is wedded to, and regardless of who's in office, make it happen. So you can go either way. But I think deciding what you want to be and sticking with it is the answer. It's harder, I think, for a county. I think it's harder for Gwinnett County to say, God, we got this issue that stretches from Snellville to Swanee in a swath that's X miles wide. Which bite of this elephant do we take first? So it's, but again, I think the answer is you got to have a plan, and once you have a plan, you can get people to help you implement it. And I think that's where the private sector comes in. It's kind of hard for a developer to go get financing and say, I'm going to build this Shangri-La here in the middle of this other stuff, and I've got no guarantees about what's going to happen around me, and I have no idea that when I get through that the place will actually be worth as much as you're loaning me, but if you have a plan, and the developer can say, this is my piece of this bigger plan, and I can guarantee you that if this other stuff happens, that my piece will be worth a lot more than you're investing in it, then we'll be okay.
Just thought, you mentioned earlier that you thought traffic congestion was one of the reasons some resurgence has occurred in the city of Atlanta. I remember that Vancouver has this, a lot of the leaders and planning director and folks in Vancouver like to say that traffic congestion is their friend, because it does have a way of getting folks to make choices And Vancouver is often ranked as one of the most livable places in the world. But it has a lot of density. Have we focused too much on traffic congestion in Atlanta? I mean, that seems to be one of the top 3 issues behind water and education, maybe, is sitting in traffic. But I mean, are we fixated on it too much?
Well, I guess it depends on the individual mentality. There's no way that I would sit in traffic for an hour twice a day. I just wouldn't do it.
You'd make a choice.
I would make a choice. Yeah.
A job choice, house choice, commuting choice.
Some way or other, I wouldn't do it. But there are plenty of people that do it every day, and if that's their choice, then okay, it suits me.
Do you think they know all the choices? I sometimes wonder if they really don't have if they really can't make a good decision because they don't have all the choices necessarily.
And we've, as a community, have not provided adequate alternatives, and so I acknowledge that. Lord, if we had built those transit lines and the commuter rail to go along with the expansion of the highways to give people choices, Tom Moreland and when he was at Georgia Dot, they did their part. They did freeing the freeways. They built the expansions and the widenings and the improvements to interchanges and those sort of things. We just didn't do the other part.
I think it was around 1979 that Gwinnett didn't pass the MARTA referendum to extend the sales tax, I guess, into Gwinnett. Do you think that would pass today?
Well, it's certainly a different community than it was then. Someone told me the other day there's.
Do us a favor and just begin that again, saying Gwinnett is certainly a different community.
Sorry, I was supposed to be helping them with that.
That's okay. So just look at
Well, Gwinnett is certainly a different community today than it was back then. Somebody's telling me there's 63 or something like that different languages spoken in the Gwinnett school system. So we're talking about a different animal. As best I can tell, their bus system on commuter routes into either the Doraville MARTA station or to downtown are very heavily patronized. So I would wonder why not if it were put to a vote. But then again, I'm not that close to the electorate in Gwinnett, so I would certainly not want to forecast what they would do. I think that I would have to say that there's certainly, it would seem to me, a better chance now.
And being that would have been almost 30 years ago, I guess by now we would have some, not only a transit line in Gwinnett potentially, but transit-oriented development there, walkable places where you could access the transit. Well, I mean, the only thing I think we haven't touched on too much is sort of race questions and things like that a whole lot. I mean, your thoughts about again, I wonder how much of suburban expansion in Atlanta was just the direction of the country at a certain time. Cars were cheaper and gas plentiful. I mean, your thoughts on we've now, our region is, it's even maybe more difficult than it was before to figure out where we are in terms of racial makeup in some counties versus, because it's very dynamic, not only racial but income segregation. Any thoughts about how that drives our development patterns?
Well, it's a tough question, and one that I think it requires an analysis from many different perspectives, from the sociological to the economic, to just generally, how did we grow up? What did our mamas say in terms of how we relate to each other? I came and started my career in Atlanta at a time when racial unrest and tension was just beginning to hit its hot spots. I was working for Fulton County at a time when the county chose to remain open on the day of Martin Luther King Jr.'s funeral, when I had argued long and hard that no, we need to close. It's a different kind of feeling today. I still see a lot of segregation, but I also see much of it being more voluntary, I think, than maybe it used to be. And if it's voluntary, that may be okay. But I think we need to make certain that the choice is always available, regardless of race or income or attitude. That if the choice is available, then we may have done our job.